Hello, my name is Jason J. Rock Houston, and you're listening to Chaotic Risk Magazine. We can be found on the web at www.chaoticrisk.com, and this is for our On the Record segment. We've been talking with our good friend Gar Borras, and today I'm going to be talking with Gar about the debut Queen album, which was released, I believe, July 13th, 1973, so that's the time frame we're talking here. And I got to tell you, Gar, like so many other albums you chose to talk about, this one was interesting because it was like listening to a brand new Queen album. And I'll tell you why. Because while I've heard of songs like Liar and Keep Yourself Alive, I'm hearing all these other tunes for the very first time. And it's kind of interesting because, like I said, this is a debut album. And a lot of these tunes, if you listen to them, they've almost got like a kind of like a Broadway-like show tune atmosphere, a little bit of vaudeville to them. And so I think maybe because Liar and Keep Yourself Alive it got more of a harder edge. Maybe that's why those were the hits from that album. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, as a kid, you're listening to the radio,
Yeah.
and I think the song that got my attention was "Keep Yourself Alive."
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
As a kid, you're hearing all this stuff that's going on the radio, which is like Alice Cooper,
Yeah.
And all of this other stuff that was going on at the same time. There was on rock radio. There was Crosby, Stills and Nash. There would be Yes. There would be Pink Floyd, and all of this stuff was was very diverse. There would be Jethro Tull, and just all. But then when you heard Queen stuff, there was just this element of rock and very elaborate harmonies.
Now, let me ask you, as important as the sound of Queen is, they've definitely, back in the day, back when this debut album came out, especially, they had a real, like, glitter look to them. They were almost like a glam rock band. And what's kind of interesting is, if you look at pictures from that time frame, I mean, I think we all pretty much, a lot of people may not have, but Freddie Mercury was one member of the band that really kind of stood out. But if you look at pictures from back, like, in 1973 when this album came out, you really didn't know what any of the guys in the band were, if you know what I mean. They all kind of had a glammy look. They all kind of really stood out, if you know what I mean.
Well, it was kind of that, carrying on from what the Beatles were doing,
Yeah.
which was having a band look. And, there was, during the 70s, there was a lot of bands that kind of got away from that.
Yeah.
But, part of what Queen seemed to be doing was creating an ambiance that tied it all together, which was the music and the look.
Yeah, almost like sound and vision, they used to say back in the day. I mean, they had both things,
Yeah, they were. But at that time, it was their first album, and to me, a lot of my favorite stuff is bands' first albums because it's you're catching them that when they're raw and young and really striking out and going for it.
Yeah, that's something
kind of like Van Halen, their first album. When you listen to that first album, they were going for it.
Yeah.
They were just laying it out there as much as they could, and it was very aggressive and very, just a lot of effort being put into it. And that's the same thing that I was catching from Queen's first album was, it was raw compared to a lot of the other stuff that they were releasing later, and it was very aggressive and just they were going for it because it's for bands at that time when you're really the bar with all these previous bands was so high that you really had to put everything into it to try to make it be a success. to kind of try to at least stand up with all of these other bands, because when you listen to it, it's a very progressive rock.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because
musically.
When I got on the Wikipedia and I was reading up on the album, they that's how they describe it, like glitter rock, progressive music. And so it's a little bit, and Queen, I think what I love, especially about this first album and Queen in general, is they've always been one of those bands that are very unapologetic. People either love them or they hate them. And the band's attitude is like, well, this is what we do. You either like it or you don't like it, but, we make no apologies. Now, you put on this debut album, it's kind of interesting that I think anybody listens to this debut album, you can definitely see the potential that of what Queen later became. But I don't think if you put on this album, you would ever imagine they'd do a song, they'd have a hit with anything like "We Will Rock You" or "Somebody to Love" or something like that, or or even "We Are the Champions."
We Are the Champions. Yeah.
It's so drastically different. I mean, that's almost Queen taken another level. They've gone pop, they've gone commercial, but it's all, to me, it's all great. If you know what I mean, because Queen is one of those bands, like I think we've discussed before, one of those bands that's really become the soundtrack of everybody's lives, I think. I mean, that's why I think Queen is able to carry on with Roger and Brian and Adam Lambert, because these songs, if you get a decent enough vocalist like Adam Lambert, it's kind of interesting because I think Adam Lambert's done a much better job of carrying on Queen than, say, Paul Rodgers did. I don't know why that is. Maybe he's more flamboyant like Freddie was. But see, if you get a decent enough singer to me that's able to carry these tunes, that's why I think fans are so accepting. They just love these songs so much, and that's why when Freddie was sick before he died, they were unable to tour all those years. I mean, people really missed seeing the band live.
Yeah, but also, when that first album came out, it really kind of introduced you to a new approach to guitar playing that Brian May was doing too. His flavor that he was putting on guitar was very different. The second you hear Brian May play, it's Brian May.
Oh yeah.
You're not going, who is that guy? No, you immediately recognize the flavor that he was putting on his guitar playing.
Yeah, but just think in 1973 when this album came out and nobody really knew who Brian May was or Queen. I mean, just think of what the rock world was thinking at the time. Man, who is this guitar player? Look at what he's doing here.
Yes, and see, that's another thing to put it in perspective, is because we're talking about like the early 1970s.
We're talking like 40, 50 years later, after the fact.
Yes, and at that time, what he was doing on guitar was really standing out compared to what a lot of other guitarists were doing at that time.
Yeah.
Not saying that once you reach this level where you're doing this kind of stuff, it's not that one person's better than another.
Yeah.
It really comes down to personal taste. It's not a competition like sports and stuff like that. Who's better and all that. But his stuff on guitar was standing up with all of these other great guitarists.
Yeah. Now, before we go any further, Gar, I got to ask you, knowing that you start out as a bass player, what are your thoughts as far as John Deacon as a bass player? How much of an influence was he on you?
Well, when you listen to their music, there were certain songs that as a bass player at that time, I'm always trying to learn how to play this stuff, and because Queen's stuff was so progressive, it was very progressive rock. There were some challenging pieces to try to learn how to play on that album. I'm listening to it as a musical appreciator, but I'm doing more than listening. I'm actually trying to dissect, and I'm trying to learn. And to be honest with you, because that album was progressive rock, there was some challenging pieces. I forgot what song it was, but there was one song. I don't know if it was Liar or something else. But towards the end of the song, there's some very aggressive bass stuff.
Yeah.
Because he's not really known, because everybody knows of him as a bass player.
Yeah.
When they started doing much more refined stuff, when they started coming out with Bohemian Rhapsody and all of that stuff. But the first album was much more progressive, and there's some very aggressive bass lines that were very challenging to try to learn how to play off of that.
Yeah.
And of course, as a bass player, that's what I was always gravitating towards, because you want to try to, I always looked at, if I could learn how to play this, I'd be ready to, I could take whatever I'm doing to the next level.
Yeah.
And so I was always using other people's material to challenge myself and push that bar farther.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's interesting talking about John Deacon as a bass player, because when people think of Queen, mostly, let's be honest, they talk about Brian, Freddie, and Roger. And John Deacon's become kind of an odd man out, but I don't think people really realize how important was he to the band, not just because of his bass playing, but because of his ability as a songwriter. I mean, people forget, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here, but in 1980, he wrote one of the band's biggest hits, Another One Bites the Dust, which makes for an interesting conversation, because if you listen to that song, first of all, the bass line just throughout that song is quite unique, quite interesting. And then, of course, at the time when that was released as a single, it became a national, worldwide hit all around the world. But the thing is, I also remember, even to this day, people talking about, what's Queen doing? That's a disco song. What are they doing going disco? How dare they? But if you listen just all the way through that song, that thumping bass line, it's like nothing you ever heard.
Well, so many music. Here's the trap that a lot of musicians use to get into. It's very, very different than the listener that doesn't play an instrument and just appreciates music.
Yeah.
Musicians, trap that you used to get into, way back when was they would judge how good a musical piece on how challenging or how difficult it was to play.
Yeah.
And if it was easy to learn how to play, then they would scoff at it.
Yeah.
And not give it the credit that it's due.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is that whether a piece is good or not has absolutely nothing to do with how challenging it is to play. It has everything to do with how catchy it is.
Oh yeah.
Because the listener is going to be drawn to it, whether it's super difficult to learn how to play, or if it's super simple to learn how to play. The average listener is not basing how they like it on, that's too easy, that's so simple to learn how to play. And the truth of the matter is, Another One Bites the Dust is not that challenging to learn how to play on the bass. But big B-U-T, it's super catchy.
Yeah, and just think about this too. Reason we're talking about it all these years later, not just because it's a great tune and everything, but it's also because it's so different for Queen. And what I mean by that, that's why they were able, with the song Another One Bites the Dust, have such a crossover hit with it. It was on the dance charts, it was on the pop charts, they played in the dance clubs, it was being played on pop radio, black stations. People thought it was like a black song. I remember back in the day, they did not know when it first came out, and they had just such a huge crossover with that.
Well, and that just, it just proves the point that I'm making.
Yeah.
And there were so many musicians back in the day that the only criteria in order to really give props to a particular musician's playing or a particular song or a particular band was based on how difficult it was or how challenging it was to play. And I feel so fortunate, that I remember in my young years I used to be that way too. I was so buried into progressive rock that if it wasn't challenging, because I was always wanting to challenge myself. But there became a point where I realized that as far as if you're going to play music professionally and you're going to want to do this as a profession, you have to broaden your vision into the fact that a piece cannot be judged on wholly and solely on how difficult it is to play. You have to be willing to want to play things that are very simple and ditties and things like that, because you just never know where the public, what the public is really going to gravitate towards. They could gravitate towards a thing that you wound up writing in like 5 minutes.
And here's a point.
Rather than something that you anguished over for months.
And here's a point too that people should consider. Now, Queen is one of those bands that always seem to have their thumb or their finger right on the pulse of whatever they were doing at the time. And I'll give you a perfect example. Like, we're sitting here talking about John Deacon and his ability as a bass player and a songwriter. Now, these days, John Deacon made his living as a bass player of Queen, and I think that's a pretty remarkable thing when you stop to think about. We're talking about John Deacon and his band Queen and his bass playing, writing a hit song like Another One Bites the Dust. If that's all that guy ever did, he could live the rest of his life like he's doing in London, kind of retired from the music business, continuing to make a ton of money just off that one song alone that he wrote. Just how many people that are trying to be professional musicians would love to have a legacy like that,
Well, but then, back in the day, say back in the 80s when I was doing original material, that was one of the things that became untrustworthy in the business, in the fact that there would always be people that were notorious for stealing another person's material. Or even one member of a band stealing from another member of the band, because the fact remained that the people that understood the business knew that all you had to do was really have one song go huge, and if you're the one that's got the writing credits on that song, you're the guy that's going to collect all the benefits because it's all secured and copyrighted and everything under your name. All the songwriter's rights are under your name.
That's why,
so there were always there would be bands that would have a dominant member that would kind of hold other members down. That's not good enough for what we're doing, or holding another member down because they're wanting to have their material that they're writing dominate whatever that band does. And there was a lot of that kind of stuff that was going on during the 80s, or there were people that were fairly well known in LA that had some notoriety. The kind of becoming well-known musicians. They would have a reputation. Hey, don't let that guy come in and hang out with you guys when you're rehearsing, because that guy's going to steal your material.
Wow, yeah. And
you see what I'm saying? They started gaining reputations of being a person that would kind of hang around with other bands, simply because they're looking for, to steal from that other band. Yeah. And there was a certain amount of paranoia that used to go on back in the 80s, because it was with the people that understood how the business was going, it was really all about that, having the songwriter's credits.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's interesting if you look at a band like Motley Crue. I mean, Nicky Sixx and Mick Mars, kind of like what you're saying, they write the bulk of the material. That's why, Nicky is just, he makes more money than anybody in that band. First of all, I'll give him credit because he is a talented songwriter, and he doesn't have to steal any of his bandmates' material or anything. But, that guy, just, if you look at what he did with Motley Crue, he's getting the bulk of the money as he should, because he kept the band going all these years. But, Nicky, just think about what he makes off his songwriting alone in a day,
Yes, and there's just going to be a point where he's going to wind up retiring, and he's never going to have to worry about anything the rest of his life.
I think he's at that point, and getting back to Queen, we start off as a band of 4 guys from England, 4 British mates, and in the early days of Queen, like we were talking about when this album came out, if you look at the songwriting credit, for the most part, they shared in the songwriting for the most part, and then the bigger Queen got, they started competing like, no, we want to write our own songs, and we want to, and they started competing to the point of like seeing who had a bigger hit and whose song charted, and that's when a lot of the ego came into play. But I'll tell you, I'm getting back to this debut album. One of the songs I've been aware of for a while, but I really always kind of loved, but they even included on the soundtrack to the movie that they put out about Queen a few years ago, which I always loved, was Doing All Right. And that's actually a song that Roger and Brian brought into Queen from their previous band, Smile. But it's a great tune, and I never understood why it wasn't a bigger hit, because it does have
Well, it was, I was around back in the time when that debut album was being played on the radio, and of course, Keep Yourself Alive. As far as a rocker, that definitely got my attention. But Doing All Right was actually being played on the radio too. Yeah. Because see, I can totally see from a producer standpoint at that time back in the early 70s, where a producer would be kind of like going, I don't know about this song, because it would just go back and forth from having very low, dynamics, like doing the mellow part, and then all of a sudden, just taking on a dime, turning to the rock.
Yeah, that's what I love about that.
Yeah. And then going back and forth, it made the song so choppy. Yeah. But from a musician standpoint, what they were doing was really exercising the beauty of a thing called dynamics. And dynamics is going from something very mellow, going to something that's very brash and in your face. And so there's a lot of bands that from a producer's standpoint, I can guarantee you they were probably having difficulty with the producer on that, because it was just going back and forth between the dynamics and stuff, which producers want to have something that's a little more easier to digest.
Like Keep Yourself Alive, it's the perfect rock anthem, you know. It really gets you going. And I'll tell you, that was really, like you, that was my introduction to Queen all those years ago, is that song, and it kind of really stuck with me all these years. And again, it doesn't get a lot of love these days because I guess it's such an old track, but I could put that's one of those songs I could put on and I could get off to it any day, you know. I mean, it's one of those songs I just can't get out of my system. It's like you listen to that and you just picture kind of seeing the band live and kind of, you know, envisioning Freddie doing his thing and everything, and Brian soloing on it. Queen, like you said, they were one of those bands that had these dynamics. Like I said, kind of people talk about Queen, they mostly talk about Freddie, Brian, and Roger because they were so flamboyant. They were so much more. Even Roger as a drummer, he's an amazing drummer if you ever watch what he does. And I dig the fact that he can also. There's a few tracks that he sang lead on over. Even on this album, there's a song called "Modern Times Rock and Roll," and he's singing lead on that.
Yeah, he's got that rock voice.
Yeah. And then Queen is one of those bands like we talked about. They also got a great. If you just listen alone to the background vocals and some of his stuff, it is amazing. And again, kind of Freddie, Roger, and Brian are all doing kind of the backing tracks as well. And like if you listen, have you ever seen the video or listen to the track Bohemian Rhapsody? It's amazing. Just listen to the backgrounds. That's such a huge part of what that song is all about.
But you hear also how that Bohemian Rhapsody, that whole influence musically was showing up on their first album.
Yeah.
It was something that they just kind of refined later on when they started doing Bohemian Rhapsody. But in the first album, you can hear the makings of it, where they were. It was kind of becoming their signature kind of thing.
Yeah.
So everything they were doing. I was fortunate enough to see Queen in concert when they had come out with Bohemian Rhapsody.
Wow.
But they weren't doing stadiums. They were playing at the Los Angeles Sports Arena, which was still a huge venue.
Wow, yeah.
But I have to say that Freddie Mercury, even at that time, they were very successful, and Bohemian Rhapsody was like being played on the radio all the time.
Yeah, took them to the next level.
They hadn't reached that stadium kind of success yet.
Yeah.
But even at that time, Freddie Mercury was, it was just hands down. I have never seen a front man like that before that. And I have never seen a front man like that that had the audience in the palm of his hand since that.
Yeah.
He to this day, Freddie Mercury was the best front man I've ever seen in my entire life. And there was more to him than just his ability as a songwriter. There was more to him than just his ability as a singer. He had this ability to be a front man and just literally have the hand and the audience in the palm of his hand.
That is so true. And I think what made Freddie such a great front man, over almost anybody else, like you said, is he was so true to what he is. I mean, now that we know all these years later, but he struggled all those years with, his sexuality and coming out and all that. It's amazing. Like, we're talking about 1973 when the debut album came out. Back then, up till about 1975, 1976, he was all glammed out. He wore the black nail polish, had the long hair, the rock look, And then about 1975, all of a sudden he cuts his hair real short, chops all the long hair off, isn't as glammed out. And then there was that period around 1980 when he grew a mustache and cut his hair real super short. And people were always trying to figure out, what is he? Is he gay? Is he bisexual? Is he straight? And I think almost to a point he was toying with people, almost trying to make them guess. But at the same time, you can see not only is he struggling, but he's trying to be true to who he was. Like he said, like, oh, I'm over this glam look, or I'm ready to grow a mustache. I don't care what people think about how it looks. This is who I am now. This is who I'm going to be. You know.
Well, then again, I mean, he's as a human being, because a lot of fans don't understand that all of these people that they wind up falling in love with their music and everything like that. These people are still human beings. Yeah. And their lives change, and their lives are not, their professional life is very different than their private life. Yeah. And so, when they're at home and they're doing their own thing, that makes them enjoy whatever they're doing in their life. They're enjoying that privately, but but then again, it eventually winds up spilling into your professional life,
or even into your music, as you're writing these songs.
Deciding that okay, well, are we going to dress up glam like we did in there, or are we going to just do that our entire career? No. Eventually people wind up evolving, but then again, they're changing, this whole ambiance and thing to your what you're bringing visually to your show. Has to occur, because you can't just wind up doing the same thing that you started your career and just keep doing it through your entire career, because it winds up getting old. And then people wind up getting tired of it, and then they start going, okay, what's the next thing?
Yeah, I mean, and it's,
so in order to keep your work interesting, you have to change your work.
Oh yeah, and it's interesting. All these years since Freddie's passed, like if you look at that last album they put out in 1991, which was called Innuendo, it still sounded like Queen. It was a different Queen, if you will. They did not sound like Queen from 1975. There were elements of that, but like you go back and you look at some of the music videos they did at the time, like there's one I think called "I'm Going Slightly Mad." Now, or even one I really dig is, because if you listen to the words of the song, "These Are the Days of Our Lives," okay, that he's kind of talking about finding out that he's sick and he's dying. I mean, the band went in, they recorded that, they knew Freddie was dying. At that time, the fans didn't necessarily know until after the fact. But if you go back and you look at the video for "These Are the Days of Our Lives," listen to the lyrics first of all, and then you'll see how what a he was kind of saying goodbye to the world, goodbye to the fans, goodbye to the band. And if you look at the video too, you can see how they tried to make him up and stuff, but you could see how really thin he was at the time, how he looked very very frail, but up until the very end, he was creating new music. He's like, I'm going to go as long as I can, and it's kind of interesting if you look back at that video. That's kind of him saying goodbye to everybody.
Well, I can totally understand something like that, because I think in past interviews that I've done with you, Jason, I've talked about how a true musician, somebody that really does embody life. A true musician, if they're playing music, they're fulfilled. And you're doing what you love to do. When you take a true musician and they can no longer do play and do that whole, there's a gigantic hole in their life. And I experienced that during a time when my kids were born, and I wound up getting away from music, and because I was trying to fulfill for my kids and my family what a father does,
of course.
and which takes you away from music because you still have to be a father, and you still have to provide. But during that time, my focus was on a very different career, and and music wasn't part of that. And I was just pursuing mainstream career things. But then that's when I realized, there just came this time where the kids became old enough, and I could go back to music. That's when I made that realization that there was this gigantic hole in my life that I was just drawn back to it like a magnet. And for him, it's even bigger than that. Because this is his life, and he's reaching the end, and he doesn't have the energy, he doesn't have the ability but yet what would he choose to do?
And if think about what a powerful statement that, again, not just that song, but the whole album, but especially that song. If you listen to the words, these are the days of our lives. He's like looking back on his whole career, everything he's ever done, and he's kind of like saying, goodbye to the world. This is what I'm thinking about this point in time. I know this is going to probably be the last thing you ever hear of me. Just think how profound that had to be,
Well, nobody wants to have to face that part of their life. We all reach a point where we have to face that part of our life, because we're not put on this earth forever. And in life, nobody knows when your expiration date is. It could be tomorrow. It could be many years from tomorrow.
And that's
nobody knows what the cards that you're going to be dealt. He was dealt those cards and everything like that, but it's just very impressive, that and it just really lays it just hits really home, how much music brought enjoyment to him, that he wanted to do music all the way to the very end.
And think about this for me. Freddie Mercury is kind of a triple threat in that a great lead singer. He could play the piano. He could play, just overall a great songwriter. That's why I dare you put on any Queen song, and I almost guarantee it's gonna, it's gonna be like taken from a page of his life, if you know what I mean. That's why those Queen songs are so profound all these years later. That's why we still listen. It's Freddie Mercury and Queen. They're not the type of band that just kind of, although there may be some tunes like this in that catalog, like take something like Tie Your Mother Down, but they're not gonna like I want to go get laid. I want to go get laid on the weekend. They even fun songs like that. They put some thought into. If you just listen to any of the lyrics, especially like.
Then again, that's the bar that was set by all the bands that were previous to Queen too. The bar in those days, in the early 70s, because the level of musicianship in progressive rock bands was so high that you had to put a lot of thought. If you weren't, it just wasn't going to fly. But there's another thing I wanted to mention about seeing Queen in concert.
Sure, go ahead.
There was a part of that concert that the rest of the band left the stage, and Freddie Mercury, it was just him at the piano, and he played quite a duration, of the show, just him at the piano.
Wow.
And I could have, I just have to say this hands down, he was so impressive in that part of the show where it was just him sitting down at the piano, playing piano and singing. I could literally listen to an entire concert of just him at a piano singing.
It's almost
for an hour and a half, 2 hours. That is how impressive he was, just him alone
Yeah.
at that piano.
I mean, it's almost like I could just picture, being that you do the Guns N' Roses tribute thing. It's almost like you can envision Axl Rose up on stage, ripping into like Paradise City or Welcome to the Jungle, and then next thing you see him sitting down and playing November Rain. I mean, the two extremes,
Well, it just seemed to be so fluid.
Yeah.
Freddie playing piano and singing. He was so entertaining at that part of the show, and it was such a surprise because I didn't know what to expect. I was a big fan of Queen, but and of course my thing was the rock stuff because I'm when you really get down to it, I am a rocker, and my favorite two songs was "Keep Yourself Alive" and "Stone Cold Crazy."
Good. I'm glad you brought that song up because that's the next point I was going to make. Now, you look at this debut album and you got everything, like I said, Broadway show tunes and vaudeville. Not that too, but like off the debut album, I'll give you my top 3 songs here: "Doing All Right," "Liar," and of course "Keep Yourself Alive." I'd say like you would be probably my all-time favorite song off this album. But you put anybody that put this album back on, back in 1973, hearing it for the first time, you'd almost after playing the entire album, you'd ask yourself, what is this? Okay, because again, we have all kinds of different music from different spectrums. Like for example, okay, I would definitely say "Keep Yourself Alive," "Doing All Right" they're definitely rock tunes. "Liar," you listen to something like that, or even "Stone Cold Crazy." A few years down the line, and those like "Liar" and "Stone Cold," almost like metal songs, full-blown on metal songs. But of course, I don't think people would really think of Queen as a metal band, but they've got kind of songs that have a metal element to them in their catalog. So Queen was really, that's the great thing about Queen. They kind of did it all.
They did.
Yeah.
They absolutely did do it all. And I would just highly recommend to anyone, their first 2 albums, if you really appreciate Queen, but you're only really familiar with the stuff that went huge, if you really want to appreciate Queen, listen to their first 2 albums, because that's, those first 2 albums kind of get overshadowed because of all the stadium stuff that they did and all this stuff that became hugely popular. But their first 2 albums really were great stuff when they were really, just kind of establishing themselves.
This is when Queen were just babies. They were in their infancy. And like I said, what I love about this debut album, I kind of got a fresh perspective, listening to it the last couple of days, is, like I said, their tunes, like I could almost picture like Killer Queen fitting on this debut album and Roger Taylor, I read somewhere where he was saying this album is very much what you said, where a band has their whole life to write their debut album. He was saying that a lot of these songs that wound up on this album we've been playing for years, or
oh yes, they were doing that stuff from like 1970, 71.
Yeah. And
by the time that album actually came out, they felt that they were musically past that.
Yeah, and anybody that's seen the movie is gonna, you may forget, actually in the scene where they're playing the song "Doing All Right," that's where they kind of meet Freddie for the first time. And, he came to see Roger and Brian in the previous band, and that's how they all met. And so Freddie wasn't really even the original vocalist, but so he's not even really an original member, but think of how important Freddie Mercury was to the overall Queen sound and what they became.
Well, I didn't know it at the time because I was one of those kids in high school, because this is, the early 70s was when I was in high school.
Of course.
And and I was just a kid that listened to his friends.
Yeah.
Hey, sneak a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and pocket your lunch money, and let's save up our money and let's buy tickets to go see Queen, or let's go buy tickets to see Pink Floyd, or let's go buy tickets to see all these other bands. I was just in that mode at that time of my life, and but I had no idea that what I was actually witnessing was an iconic band, that a band that would go down in history as one of the historic bands.
Oh yeah.
I was just saving my lunch money to go see a band that I really liked in concert.
Yeah.
And now when you look back, how fortunate I was to see Queen, how fortunate I was to see them at that time in concert, and how fortunate I was to see a band like Thin Lizzy opening for them.
Oh, I was going to ask about that. Wow.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, it's just like you're just a kid that's a huge appreciator of music. You're trying to absorb music like a sponge because you're absorbed into music and you're wanting to do it and you're wanting to challenge yourself. Because as a high school kid, can you imagine how young and how green you are as a musician, and you're trying to take on pieces of music that are extremely challenging by bands that are putting out music because the bar is set so high by all of their predecessors.
Well, okay. I was getting ready to ask you who was the opening band, but Thin Lizzy, that's another interesting one. They're another one of those great legendary bands that they never really quite got the dues they should. I mean, perfect example of that is recently. I mean, they've been nominated several times on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Recently, they got kind of rejected, and and another interesting thing is like you have a band like T-Rex. They're another great rock band that kind of the singer died way too young, and band never really made a huge mark, but people know who they are. It's kind of interesting. A band like T-Rex gets into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but a band that sold a lot more records like Thin Lizzy gets rejected. It's just kind of they really don't know what's going on. I don't think sometimes at Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Well, that's why you gotta look at some of that stuff. Is who knows what the politics are behind these decisions.
Yeah.
I mean, if the decision was made by people that were just the only criteria was huge passion behind music, then some of these decisions would be different. Yeah. But unfortunately, sometimes there's other politics and things, other than passion of music that's behind some of these decisions that are made.
Oh, yeah.
And then of course, who are the people that are crying foul?
Yeah.
The passionate music, the people that are passionate about music, and the people that are basing their decision on passion in music.
It's kind of interesting, like I know another entity that's involved in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is Rolling Stone. I remember when Kiss got in the Hall of Fame maybe about 10 years ago or so now, and they a band been around 40, 50 years at that time. They'd never been on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine until they got inducted into the Rock and Roll thing. Just think about that now for a minute.
Well, for me, I just, all I can do is look back and just, feel how lucky I was to be a kid growing up during that time and being able to appreciate, what was going on at that time.
And that's why, like, you even talk about a band like T-Rex. I'm sure you've heard that song, Bang it gone, get it gone. You know what I'm talking about. So.
Absolutely. I was well aware of T-Rex. I was well aware of another band called Slade.
Oh, okay, yeah, definitely. But like,
a lot of people. That's another band that I didn't, put out as a heavy influence because they were much more, kind of pop rock, and they weren't challenging me musically as much. I was a big fan of Slade back in the early 70s. I was a big fan of T-Rex. I was a big fan of a lot of that stuff that was going on at that time. And so there's more to what I appreciated musically back in those days, because when I was posting the albums and the music that would on Facebook, it's because that stuff was what I was utilizing as a musician to tell it.
Wow.
But at the same time, I was also a music appreciator. I listened to music and loved music by other bands, just like everybody else that doesn't know how to play music appreciates bands too.
I just have to ask you real quick about Slade. That's interesting because Slade, from what I understand, they were much bigger in their home country of England, and Quiet Riot eventually, when they covered those two Slade songs, Mama We're All Crazy Now and Come On Feel the Noise.
They had a lot to do with Slade had a lot to do with Quiet Riot's success.
Yeah. And you know what's funny? I interviewed Frankie Benali a number of years ago, and he was telling me, he says, I'll tell you the story about that. He says, Quiet Riot got the fame and notoriety, and Slade made all the money off those songs. And it's kind of funny, even at that point when Quiet Riot covered those songs, Slade had been retired at that point for a number of years. But then, again, like Frankie said, that they just kind of put Slade back on the map. And I kind of be interested in how you got into Slade, because, like I said, they were much bigger in England when they were here in the U.S. So that's kind of cool.
But I knew about Slade, and to be honest, those Slade songs were Quiet Riot's biggest hits.
Yeah, even to this day.
And a lot of people don't know that. They think that Quiet Riot wrote those songs. No, Slade wrote those songs. Now, there's songs that went big that Quiet Riot wrote also.
Like Metal Health.
But, some of the biggest sellers were Slade songs.
And you got to ask yourself, like, the only other band I know that Quiet Riot ever covered was they did a cool cover a number of years ago when Kevin Dubrow was still around, when the band first got back together with him, of AC/DC's Highway to Hell. But you got to ask yourself, if Slade was such a bad band, why did they choose to cover not one but two Slade songs?
Yes, they what does that say about their songwriting abilities? Slade was a very good band, and they're just kind of one of those bands that are lost in the shuffle now. Most people really don't know much about them. But way back in the early 70s, they were a very good band, and I was well aware of them, and I was a fan of theirs. Wow. And this is way before Quiet Riot.
Oh yeah, way before. And like I said, by the time Quiet Riot had the two hit songs with Mama We're All Crazy Now and Come On Feel the Noise, Slade had long retired, but people became aware of him kind of again, and there was a little bit of a resurgence for Slade. But
but then it goes back down to having those songwriters right.
Yeah.
How important it was to have those songwriters right. But then, back in the 80s, for me, once I really kind of was grasping this whole thing about how important it was to build up your abilities to be a songwriter. That was my motivation to become a songwriter myself, and and start writing, songs and doing all of that, because I realized that that's where the money was. And so there's a good portion of the 80s where I really put a high priority on not just being a good bass player and being a good backup vocalist, because as I realized, I think I said this in another interview with you too, that most bass players were looked at as
like a failure,
interchangeable, disposable. Because the bass player was just a guy that stood back in the back over by his amp, by the drummer, and was very boring to watch and just kind of plugged on his instrument and that. So most people most bands looked at bass players as very replaceable. And of course, for me, hell no, I'm not going to make myself replaceable. I'm going to have so much more to bring to the table. I'm going to bring my bass abilities, my ability to come up with the perfect bass line for whatever somebody else is writing, but also my ability to sing and structure harmonies, and also my ability to bring songs to the table too. You know what I mean? And the more you have to bring to the table, the more irreplaceable you become.
You know what's interesting is I don't know how many.
That was a big thing for me, really working on my ability as a songwriter.
I don't know if you're aware of this, but this is kind of interesting. I recently learned this about one of my all-time great heroes, Ronnie James Dio. Of course, people think of Dio, they think of him as a great frontman, great lead singer, but he started out, so I was reading, out as a bass player. The bass guitar was actually his main instrument before he became a singer. And even when he was in Sabbath and Dio, I guess he'd go in the studio, and that's how he'd write a lot of his songs, is on the bass. He'd go in the studio, or he'd say I could sit down at the piano, but I found out the money is in the songwriting, like what you were saying, and I'd much rather just get up on stage and sing. That's kind of what I do best, I feel. But I can play bass, I can sit down at the piano, and it's kind of interesting to find out all these famous singers can actually play other instruments.
You have to have some kind of musical background to be a really, really good singer.
And what's funny, talking about Queen today is, if you look at throughout Queen's history, like Brian and Roger, they've kind of stayed a lot the same. I mean, Brian's still got the same curly hair, it's just gray. Roger's got he grew a beard, his hair's a little short, it's gray, but they look pretty much, the look has stayed the same pretty consistently throughout the years. Freddie Mercury and John Deacon, if you look at like some old videos, they were the two guys kind of always alternating their look. I mean, John Deacon went from having like Freddie Mercury in the early days, like a great glam rock look, the beautiful long hair, and then like Freddie one day he decides to cut the long hair off, and then if you look at towards the end of the movie, like period where he had like, I don't know if he was wearing a wig or just super curly hair, but they were always, and from what I understand, John and Freddie were probably the closest in the band, and that's why John Deacon, after Freddie Mercury died, he didn't want to do Queen anymore. He told the guys, hey, if you guys want to carry it on or do whatever, that's fine with me, because of course he still gets a percentage of whatever they do. But just think about that for a minute. But that's why Queen's been able to kind of carry on with just Roger and Brian, because like you said, overall the songs are just that great.
Well, I think change is a necessary part of keeping your relevancy musically. Look at David Bowie.
Yeah.
And look at all of these other, like Madonna, and so forth. There, if you notice that everybody understands the marketability of the look part of your show.
Yeah.
And if you're just kind of just rehashing the same thing, over and over and over, the public winds up getting tired, and I think change in those things is a necessary part, and that's the reason why you've seen so many hugely successful people have very, very long careers.
And it's interesting, like, to look at the band from Queen we're talking about today from start to finish. Like, from what I understand, I've heard the band talk over years. John Deacon, they were all very affected, obviously, by Freddie's death, but John Deacon seems to have really been affected the most, where he could not even imagine stepping on a stage without Freddie in the band. And just think about that. There's some musicians, we're gonna carry on, we'll get a new singer, but it affected him that much. I'm sure it affected the other guys as well, because they've talked about, even to the point where when Freddie first announced he had AIDS and he was dying and stuff, the band at that time, they knew he was sick, but they did not. They did not put a secret out there. They did not expose it until he was ready to do so. They at that point, even though they had been feuding a while, they all came together like as a family, and they were saying up till the very end how the British press was actually the worst. They treated Freddie especially worse than the American press ever did. Like, they were camping outside his house in London like 24 hours up until he died, just to get a statement from him.
Well, the press in general, the press that is working around famous entertainers, they're not exactly some of the nicest people in the world. And I think the British press, I think, are at the top of that heap as far as meanness towards the people that actually supply what they need to make their living.
Just think about that.
When you really think about it, their lifeblood is the people that they're literally attacking like sharks. And so look at what they do with the royal family. It's just like they're literally sharks, and they're just looking for all kinds of dirt, because for some reason that's what
sells. Papers.
That's what sells, and there's just no shame to what they'll do, and no remorse for how that can affect a person like Freddie that's on his way out. You know what I mean? There's just no remorse to what they would do, but we all have to live with ourselves, with what decisions that we make in life, and for me, I just I think I'm very grateful that I've made decisions where I want to be able to be happy with myself all the way to the end. I wouldn't want I don't think anyone goes through life that doesn't have regret. But the people that do that kind of stuff for a living, I could just imagine if they have any kind of, morals or reflection, intro reflection, that they wouldn't, have some kind of regret as what they chose
to do,
and how they chose to live their life, and how they chose to make a living.
Gar, I talked to you all day. You and I have such a mutual respect for a band like Queen and this debut album, the music. Before we wrap this up, though, I would like to have you share a little tale from the Gar Borras story, if you will. I always love reading your posts on that on Facebook, and you were sharing the other day about, and this just kind of goes to who you are, talking about, like, you can remember, I think, when you were in the 3rd grade or something, that you were always trying to get up on in front of the other school kids in the class and sing, and the teacher finally gave in and let you do it. So why don't you share that story, and then we can wrap it up for today.
Well, yeah, it's a true story. I was just a kid in the 3rd grade, and I was growing up in West Covina, California, and I went to elementary school called San Jose Elementary School, and it was right up the street. And I used to drive the teacher batty because I would always raise my hand and ask the teacher if I could get up in front of the class and sing a song, and every time I would ask if I could sing a song, the teacher would just go no, and just shoot me down. And I did this a lot.
Yeah.
And then finally, the teacher decided to call my bluff because I could tell by the look on the teacher's face that she thought I was going to chicken out.
Oh, wow.
Because here I am, a 3rd grade kid, and I have absolutely no experience getting up in front of people, and most people, you don't realize what you're getting yourself into until all of a sudden you're standing up in front of all of these people.
Yeah.
And I think that she really thought that I was going to chicken out, and so I asked her again, can I get in front of it? And okay, get up in front of the class and sing your song. And so I got up in front of the class, and for some reason it just never crossed my mind to freak out in that situation. It just felt very natural to me to get up in front of the class.
And so what was the response you got? Like, was it positive?
It was incredibly positive.
Wow.
And that surprised the heck out of me. I had no idea. I think that the rest of the kids in the class were so impressed that I didn't freak out.
Talk about having a premonition. Talk about having a premonition of what you'd be doing years later. But final question for that before we wrap it up. Do you remember the name of the song?
It was a song called Que Sera, Sera.
Oh, wow.
Whatever will be, will be. The future's not ours to see.
Wow.
Que Sera, Sera. What will be, will be. It's a song about what you're going to do, when you grow up.
What a premonition. I tell you, man. Who would have known?
I had no idea that it was going to be a premonition song, that, it was a song about, I had no idea about the tie-in.
Wow.
It just, that's the song that I got up and I sang in front of the class.
Wow.
And, the reaction I got was a complete dumbfounded surprise.
Oh, wow. Well,
they all got out of their chairs and they started clapping, and it was way more than I ever expected.
And then years later, you go to see Queen in concert, and you'd want to do it all over again. And I bet you were right in the audience singing every song along with Freddie Mercury.
I'm just blessed to still be doing what I'm doing. I think I will do it as long as I can physically get up in front of the audience. Because just like Freddie, he wanted to do it all the way to the very end.
And he did.
And I'm no different.
Wow.
I'm going to do what I do as long as I can actually get up there and still do it, and as long as people are going to still keep coming to my shows
there you go.
in large numbers, I'm going to keep going. I don't see an expiration on it.
Yeah.
The public will decide when that expiration is going to happen.
I hear you.
And when the public makes that decision, I'm going to be okay with it.
There you go. Once again, from our good friend Gar Borras. Thanks so much, Gar, for doing this. I'll be talking to you.
Always a pleasure, Jason.
Okay,
thank
bye-bye.
you so much again for inviting me.
Of course.
I can't thank you enough.
So much fun. Bye.